The night was unnervingly quiet, a stillness hanging in the air that felt more like a warning than calm. Miriam stood in the middle of the crowded conference room, her heart pounding. The walls, lined with polished wood and golden-framed portraits, seemed to close in on her. The faint murmur of voices around her only made the chill inside her grow stronger. There was something wrong tonight, and she could feel it deep in her bones. Her eyes flicked nervously from one man to another. James, the ever-charming project manager, who always seemed to have a smile for everyone. Tony, the reserved, brooding strategist, whose silence often spoke louder than words. And Mike, the easygoing team lead, the one who'd always been her closest confidant. They were all here, as usual, at the after-hours meeting. But tonight was different. Something in their eyes, something in the way they looked at her, made her stomach churn. This wasn't just another regular meeting. It wasn't about work anymore. Miriam had no idea how she had missed it, how she had failed to see the signs. The initial warmth she had felt toward these men, the people she trusted, the people she had worked with for years, was starting to dissolve into cold dread. The distance between them felt like a chasm, and for the first time in her life, Miriam could hear the echo of her own vulnerability. As they discussed the upcoming merger, her mind drifted. She felt like an outsider in a room full of familiar faces. They spoke in code, used words she didn't quite understand, terms that made her feel like a stranger in her own life. She had never been part of their secretive world, but she had always trusted them to have her back. They were her colleagues, her friends, weren't they? A sharp laugh from James snapped her back to the present. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that didn't sit right with Miriam. He had always been the one to keep things light, but tonight, his humor felt forced. "Can you believe she actually thought we would let her in on this?" James said, laughing a little too loud, too long. Tony's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She had her role to play," he said, his voice barely audible over the noise in the room. Miriam felt a rush of heat rise to her cheeks. Her mouth went dry. What were they talking about? Why did it feel like the conversation was about her? She shifted uncomfortably, taking a small step back as Mike, the last of the three, stared at his phone, completely oblivious to the tension building in the room. The others may have been involved in something bigger, but Mike had always been her ally. Or had he? Was he just pretending, too? Her thoughts began to spiral. She had trusted them, each one of them, without question. But trust was a fragile thing. And tonight, Miriam felt the delicate web she had woven with these men beginning to unravel, thread by thread. The clock on the wall ticked louder now, each passing second like a countdown. Miriam took another small step back. The air in the room felt heavier, like it was pressing down on her chest. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside, everything was starting to unravel. Suddenly, the door slammed open. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. Miriam turned sharply, her heart racing. She wasn't prepared for the person who walked through the door. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure she hadn't seen in over a year. Daniel. Her breath hitched. Daniel, the CEO of the company, a man who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. He had been missing for months, his disappearance a topic of whispered speculation and rumor. No one knew where he had gone, and no one had dared ask. His return tonight felt impossible, like something ripped from a thriller movie, yet here he was, as though he had never left. Miriam's pulse quickened, a strange mixture of fear and disbelief coursing through her. The man who had once been the face of the company, the one who had taken her under his wing, was standing before her. But something was different. He didn't look the same. His face was drawn, his eyes hard and unforgiving. His gaze swept across the room, pausing just long enough to meet Miriam's. A flicker of something dark passed through his expression, but it was gone so quickly that Miriam wasn't sure she had seen it. "Good evening," Daniel said, his voice flat. It was the same voice she remembered, but now it carried a weight, as though he had seen things that changed him forever. The room fell silent. James, Tony, and Mike all straightened, their casual demeanor evaporating. They seemed to snap to attention, each of them visibly uneasy in the presence of their former boss. "Miriam," Daniel said, his voice suddenly softer. "I'm glad you're here." Miriam blinked, her confusion deepening. Why was he speaking to her like this? It didn't feel right. "Why don't you all go get some air?" "I need to speak to Miriam alone," Daniel continued, his words commanding, though not raised. No one protested. The three men quickly filed out of the room, leaving Miriam and Daniel standing in the eerie quiet. Miriam felt the air shift as the door closed behind them. She opened her mouth to speak, but Daniel raised a hand, signaling her to remain silent. "Sit down," he said. Miriam hesitated. She knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she obeyed, taking a seat across from him at the long conference table. Daniel stared at her for a long moment before finally speaking. "You trusted them, didn't you?" His voice was soft, almost pitying, but the look in his eyes was sharp, cutting. Miriam's throat tightened. She didn't respond. She wasn't sure what to say. He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You should have known better, Miriam. They've been playing you the entire time." The words hit her like a slap. A cold rush of realization swept over her. Her trust, her belief in these men, had been misplaced. She had been nothing more than a pawn in their game, her every move orchestrated, manipulated. "But why?" Miriam whispered, her voice shaking. "Why would they do this to me?" Daniel shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Because you're a threat. You always were." Miriam froze, the room spinning. Her mind raced to comprehend what he had just said. What was he talking about? How was she a threat? Before she could ask another question, Daniel stood up abruptly. "You need to leave. Now." Miriam's heart slammed against her chest. She stood too, her body tense, ready to flee. But as she turned to leave, Daniel's voice stopped her. "Don't trust anyone. Not even yourself." The words echoed in her mind as she stumbled out of the room, her mind reeling with questions she couldn't answer. Who had she been working with all this time? What was really going on? And why was Daniel warning her now? Her pulse raced, her body filled with adrenaline. She had to know the truth. But at what cost? Miriam couldn't shake the chill that clung to her skin. Her feet barely touched the ground as she walked down the hall. Each step felt heavier, like gravity was somehow stronger in that moment, pulling her deeper into the unknown. The words Daniel had spoken rang in her ears. "Don't trust anyone. Not even yourself." She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. What had she walked into? She thought she knew the men around her, James, Tony, Mike, but now it felt like the ground beneath her was shifting, like the people she had spent so much time with had been wearing masks the entire time. The hallway stretched ahead of her, dark and silent. Miriam quickened her pace, her mind racing. She needed to get out of here, away from the suffocating atmosphere of the building. She reached the elevator and pressed the button repeatedly, impatience boiling in her veins. The doors opened with a soft ding, and she stepped inside. As the door slid shut, she finally let out the breath she had been holding. Her hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. She had barely made it out of that room alive. What would have happened if she hadn't? Would they have gone through with whatever twisted plan they were hatching? The elevator hummed as it descended, the sound oddly soothing. But Miriam's mind was anything but calm. She kept seeing Daniel's face, that hard, calculating look in his eyes. What had he meant when he said she was a threat? The elevator doors opened with another ding. She stepped out and walked briskly to her car, her mind clouded with confusion and dread. She couldn't stay here. Not tonight. She needed answers. And she had to find them alone. Miriam sat in her car for a long while, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows across her windshield. It wasn't just fear that gripped her, it was something deeper. Something primal. She knew she couldn't trust anyone, but the question was, who was she really running from? She couldn't go to the police. Not yet. The only people she knew were the ones involved in this mess. The ones she had trusted. Her mind replayed her conversations with James, Tony, and Mike. They had all acted like they were on her side. They'd made her feel like part of their world. But what if it was all part of a bigger plan? As she pulled onto the main road, Miriam's phone buzzed in her purse. She jumped, startled, and reached for it quickly. Her heart sank when she saw the name flashing on the screen. It was James. Against her better judgment, she answered the call. "Miriam," James said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "Where are you? We need to talk." Miriam's breath caught in her throat. Talk? Was this a trap? Was this just another attempt to pull her back into their game? "I don't think we have anything left to talk about," she replied, her voice tight with distrust. James didn't hesitate. "You don't understand. We're all in this together. You're not alone in this. They're coming for all of us." Miriam's eyes narrowed. They? Who was they? And why was James suddenly sounding so desperate? "What do you mean?" Miriam asked, her voice shaking despite her best effort to stay calm. "There's a bigger picture here," James continued, his tone lowering. "We've all been kept in the dark, Miriam. And now that you know, you're in danger too." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Miriam's mind spun. What was he talking about? What bigger picture? And why was she suddenly a part of it? "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. James sighed, and for a moment, Miriam could almost hear the weight of his frustration through the phone. "It's complicated. There are things you don't know, things I'm not allowed to tell you. But I can't protect you anymore. They've set their sights on you." Miriam's pulse raced. "Who?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I can't say. But trust me, if you don't leave town right now, you won't make it through the night." The urgency in James's voice hit her like a punch to the gut. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run far away from this mess. But where would she go? Who could she trust? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car engine revving behind her. Miriam's heart skipped a beat. She glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. A black SUV was tailing her. No, this couldn't be happening. "James," Miriam whispered, her voice cracking. "Someone's following me." "What? Where are you?" James sounded frantic now. Miriam's eyes darted around as she sped up, taking a sharp turn onto a side street. The SUV followed, its headlights blinding her in the rearview mirror. "Get off the phone," James hissed. "Don't let them know you're aware. Get to a safe place, anywhere you can hide." The line went dead. Panic set in as Miriam's hand shook uncontrollably on the steering wheel. She couldn't think straight. Every move she made felt like it could be her last. She swerved through the streets, trying to lose the SUV, but the black vehicle stayed on her tail. The city, once familiar and comforting, now seemed like a maze of dark alleys and hidden dangers. Miriam's breaths came in short gasps. She wasn't just being followed, she was being hunted. A sharp turn onto a dimly lit road brought her closer to a secluded area. She slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as she skidded into an abandoned parking lot. Miriam turned off the engine, plunging the car into darkness. She held her breath, waiting, listening. For several moments, nothing happened. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched the SUV in the distance. It had stopped too, its lights flickering briefly. Miriam didn't dare make a move. But then, the sound of footsteps echoed in the silence. Someone was approaching. She stayed perfectly still, praying they wouldn't notice her. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Miriam felt a bead of sweat trickle down her neck. There was no way she could outrun them on foot, no way she could fight them. The only thing she could do was wait and pray she wasn't seen. A figure appeared in the dim light. Miriam's breath caught in her throat as she recognized him. It was Tony. Her stomach dropped. Tony? What was he doing here? Was he part of this too? He paused in the middle of the parking lot, looking around. Miriam's heart raced. This was her chance. She could slip out of the car, run, get to the other side of the lot where there were shadows to hide in. But as she reached for the door handle, Tony's voice rang out, breaking the stillness. Miriam, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Now. The tension in this scene intensifies as Miriam realizes the danger she's in, but the mystery deepens with each twist. Is Tony really part of the conspiracy? Who are the mysterious people after her, and what are they after? Miriam is left in an even more precarious situation, and the reader is left hanging, wondering what will happen next. Miriam's breath hitched as Tony's voice echoed through the silent parking lot, the weight of his words sinking into her. We need to talk. Now. It was a command, not a request. Miriam knew that tone well. It was the same one he'd used when they were working together, the one he used when he wanted something done and didn't want to take no for an answer. Her fingers tightened on the door handle. She could feel the cool metal beneath her palm, but she didn't move. Not yet. Her heart pounded in her chest, racing faster than her thoughts could follow. Was Tony a part of this? Was he working with the others? She knew he had his secrets, but so did she. The web she had unwittingly stepped into was thickening, each thread pulling her deeper into something she wasn't sure she could escape. Tony, she whispered, her voice trembling as she peered through the rearview mirror. She couldn't let him see her just yet, not until she figured out what was going on. She had to stay calm. Think, Miriam, think. She could see him now, standing in the middle of the lot, his silhouette dark against the streetlights. He was looking around, scanning the area. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. That told her one thing: he wasn't scared. If anything, he was comfortable. And if he was comfortable, it meant one thing: he didn't expect her to be a threat. But Miriam knew better. She wasn't some pawn to be manipulated anymore. She wasn't going to let him play her. Not again. Her mind raced as she considered her options. She could try to run, find a way out of here and disappear into the night. But the moment she left the car, Tony would know. And she had no idea what kind of backup he had, if he had any at all. The SUV had already been following her, so it was clear someone else was involved in all of this. The shadows around her grew deeper, the air thick with tension. Then, in a flash of brilliance, an idea hit her. Miriam could use Tony's familiarity with her to her advantage. She could pretend to cooperate, to play along with whatever game he thought he was playing. She wasn't afraid to deceive him if it meant buying her time. Taking a deep breath, Miriam cracked open the car door just enough to speak through the small gap. Tony, her voice was soft, almost pleading. I don't know what's going on. Please, tell me what you want from me. The words felt like poison in her mouth, but she had no choice. This was the only way to keep him from getting too suspicious. There was a brief pause. Miriam could feel Tony's gaze on her, piercing and calculating. He was trying to gauge her, to figure out if she was bluffing. You think I'm your enemy now? His voice was low, laced with something she couldn't quite place. Was it amusement? Anger? I don't know what to think anymore, Miriam replied honestly, her voice strained with exhaustion. But I know something's wrong. I know you're not the person I thought you were. Tony's laugh echoed through the night air, dry and humorless. He took a step closer, but stopped just out of reach, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. You're right, he said, his tone darkening. I'm not the person you thought I was. But neither are you, Miriam. None of us are who we seem to be. Miriam's heart skipped a beat. Those words struck her like a slap in the face. Was he hinting at something? Was he revealing that he knew something she didn't? What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes never leaving his. Tony's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Miriam thought he was going to turn and walk away. But instead, he stepped closer to the car, his footsteps slow and deliberate. "You've always been a pawn in someone else's game, Miriam," Tony said softly, his eyes locked onto hers. "But now you've become more than that." "More?" Miriam echoed, confusion rippling through her. "More than a pawn? What are you talking about?" Tony sighed and ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face. "There's so much you don't know. I can't tell you everything, but I'll tell you this, you're more important than you realize. You have been from the start." Miriam stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "Important? To whom? And why?" Before she could respond, the sound of an engine roared to life in the distance. The black SUV was approaching again, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a blade. Tony's expression shifted from calm to alert in an instant. His eyes darted to the approaching vehicle, and Miriam could see the tension in his posture. "Get in the car," he ordered, his voice no longer the smooth, commanding tone she was used to. This was different, this was urgent. "Now." Miriam hesitated for a moment, but then something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, told her that she didn't have a choice. She slammed the car door shut and threw the engine into gear, her heart pounding in her chest as she quickly sped off. Tony's car followed closely behind, the black SUV still tailing them from a distance. The streets were eerily empty, the silence deafening except for the hum of the engines. Miriam's mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything. She thought she had a grip on this. She thought she knew who was involved and what they wanted. But the more she learned, the more it seemed like she was only scratching the surface of something far more dangerous than she ever imagined. They drove for miles, weaving through narrow streets and deserted alleys, the SUV never far behind. Miriam's thoughts were spinning. What was Tony really involved in? And why was she suddenly the center of all this? Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where the SUV was still close, its headlights blinding in the reflection. They weren't just following her. They were hunting her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tony signaled for her to pull into a secluded area. The road was lined with tall trees, the darkness swallowing up the world outside. She parked the car, and Tony quickly got out, his movements swift and purposeful. Miriam hesitated for a moment before following suit. She stepped into the cold night air, the silence pressing down on her as she walked over to where Tony stood by his car. "We're not safe here," Tony muttered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "From who?" Miriam asked, her voice tight with fear. "The people who have been watching us. The ones who want to keep you in the dark. The ones who want to keep you under their control." Miriam's breath caught in her throat. "Who are they?" Tony looked around again, as if making sure they weren't being watched. Then, he turned to face her, his eyes serious. "The truth is bigger than you think. And the longer you stay in the dark, the harder it'll be to escape." Suddenly, the distant sound of a car engine reached their ears. Tony's eyes widened in alarm. "We have to go. Now." Miriam's pulse raced as she followed Tony through the darkness. The unknown was closing in, and she had no idea where this twisted game was going to take her next. All she knew was that she couldn't escape it. Not now. Not yet. But as they hurried through the woods, the question that had been haunting her for hours continued to echo in her mind: who was really in control here? The suspense continued to mount as Miriam's desperate search for answers led her deeper into the tangled web of deceit. Was Tony a friend or foe? And what exactly did they want from her? As she followed Tony into the darkness, one thing was certain: there was no turning back. The engine noise grew louder, and then Miriam froze. In the distance, two more vehicles appeared, their headlights cutting through the trees. Who were they? And was Tony really on her side? The truth was out there, but would she survive long enough to find it? Miriam's pulse raced as she stared at the two approaching vehicles, their headlights slicing through the dense trees. She barely had time to react before the lead car came to a screeching halt in front of them, sending dust and gravel scattering in all directions. Her breath caught in her throat as the doors of both vehicles opened simultaneously. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, the sudden tension so thick it almost felt suffocating. Tony stood next to her, his expression unreadable, but she could see the slight tension in his shoulders. He was no longer the cool, collected person she thought she knew. He was different now, more nervous, more anxious. Was he hiding something? Miriam couldn't tell. She wasn't sure she could trust him anymore. The first man stepped out of the lead car. He was tall, with broad shoulders and an air of authority that made Miriam feel small and vulnerable. He looked at Tony, then at her, his dark eyes narrowing as he sized her up. Well, the man said in a voice that was both cold and calculated. So, this is her. The one you've been hiding. Miriam tensed. Hiding? What was this man talking about? Tony didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, his jaw tight as he exchanged a look with the stranger. Finally, after a long pause, Tony spoke. You're early, he said, his voice low and cautious. The stranger's lips curled into a cold smile. I don't have time to play games, Tony. We've been patient long enough. He turned his gaze back to Miriam. We need to take her with us. Now. Miriam felt her stomach drop. Take her with them? Before she could react, another man stepped out from the second vehicle, his hand resting on the butt of a gun tucked into the waistband of his pants. His presence added a whole new layer of danger to the situation. Miriam instinctively took a step back, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything that was happening. Tony remained still, not making a move to resist. Was he really working with these people? Was he betraying her? She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but the fear lodged in her throat like a stone, silencing her. The man with the gun took a few steps toward her. You've been running around, causing trouble, he said, his voice low and menacing. And now you're going to help us finish this. Miriam's heart skipped a beat. Finish this? What exactly was she supposed to be helping with? The first man, who had spoken earlier, looked at Tony again. His eyes were hard, calculating. I don't care how long it takes, he said, his voice suddenly sharp. We need her. She doesn't know it yet, but she's a key part of something much bigger. Something much bigger? Miriam felt a chill run down her spine. The mystery that had started as a personal problem was quickly expanding into something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Tony stepped closer to Miriam, his presence offering a slight comfort in the midst of the growing threat. You don't understand what you're doing, Tony said, his voice edged with a warning. She's not part of your plan. The man with the gun stepped forward, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. We'll see about that. Miriam's mind raced. She had to get out of here. Whatever these men were planning, it didn't involve her, and she wasn't going to let them drag her into whatever nightmare they were part of. She took a deep breath and, without thinking, bolted. She sprinted toward the woods, her footsteps crashing through the underbrush as she raced to escape. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Behind her, she heard shouting, the sound of footsteps pounding against the dirt. Tony's voice called out her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to trust him anymore. The cold night air cut through her as she ran, her lungs burning from the effort. The trees around her seemed to close in, the darkness swallowing her whole. Miriam wasn't sure how long she had been running, but she could feel herself slowing down. Her legs were giving out, and her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. She couldn't keep this up much longer. Suddenly, she stumbled. Her foot caught on a hidden root, sending her crashing to the ground. Pain shot through her body as she hit the dirt, her hands scraping against the rough earth. She lay there for a moment, trying to regain her breath, but the footsteps were getting closer. The men were closing in, and she didn't know if she could outrun them. She needed help. But where? Her thoughts were racing. Her mind scrambling for a solution. And then, out of nowhere, a voice called out from the darkness. Miriam. She froze. The voice was familiar, but it didn't make any sense. She strained her eyes to see who it was, but the darkness was too thick. Miriam, the voice repeated, more urgently this time. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she scrambled to her feet. She had to get out of there. Miriam, it's me, the voice said again, this time with a hint of desperation. Without thinking, she turned toward the sound. And there, standing in the shadows, was the last person she expected to see. It was Tony. But this was different. There was no smugness in his expression, no calculated calm. He looked scared. Really scared. Miriam's heart pounded in her chest as she took a hesitant step toward him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" Tony glanced over his shoulder, his eyes flicking back to the men who were now closing in on them. "You need to come with me. Now." Miriam shook her head. "No. I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't trust you." Tony's expression hardened. "I understand. But you don't have a choice anymore." Miriam's mind was in chaos. She didn't know what to believe. The situation was spiraling out of control, and she was caught in the middle of it. She was just trying to survive, trying to make sense of a world that no longer made any sense. Suddenly, there was a loud crack in the distance, gunshots. Miriam's heart skipped a beat. The men were getting closer. Tony grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the woods. "We don't have time," he said, urgency in his voice. Miriam didn't resist. She was terrified, but she didn't see any other choice. They ran deeper into the woods, the sound of footsteps growing louder behind them. As they moved through the trees, Miriam tried to process everything that had happened. Who were these people? What did they want from her? She had to know the truth. And if Tony was the key to unlocking it, then she would have to trust him, at least for now. The next few minutes were a blur. Miriam felt like she was being dragged through the darkness, the night swallowing them whole. But no matter how fast they ran, the men were still close behind. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a small, run-down cabin. Tony stopped suddenly, pulling Miriam to a halt. He looked around nervously, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We're not safe yet," he said. "But this is the only place we can go." Miriam stared at the cabin. She wasn't sure what was going on, but one thing was clear, her life was no longer her own. And if she didn't figure out what these people wanted from her soon, there might not be a way out. As Miriam stepped into the cabin, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The door creaked shut behind them, and the darkness inside seemed to press in on all sides. Was Tony really on her side? Or had she just walked right into the heart of the conspiracy? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps reached her ears again. Were they already here? The mystery deepened, and the danger intensified. Would Miriam make it out of this alive? The door of the cabin slammed shut behind them, and Miriam could hear the echo of its heavy thud reverberating through the cold night. The darkness inside felt even more oppressive than the woods they had just fled from. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle in the shadows, seemed to amplify the tension in her chest. Tony's grip on her arm tightened, pulling her further into the cabin. Miriam could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had run, and she was still running, but now she was trapped. Trapped in a cabin with the one person she thought she could trust, yet even now, she wasn't sure where his loyalties lay. "Where are they?" Miriam whispered, her voice barely audible in the heavy silence. Tony didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved toward the window, peeking through the cracks in the dusty old blinds. His face was tense, his jaw clenched, as if he was trying to prepare for something. "They're out there," he said finally, his voice low. "And they won't stop until they find you." The words struck her like a cold slap. They won't stop until they find me? What was this all about? What did they want from her? And why had Tony been so secretive, so unwilling to tell her the truth? Miriam took a deep breath and forced herself to steady her nerves. This wasn't the time to fall apart. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "Tony," she said, her voice shaking but determined, "what the hell is going on? Who are those men? Why do they want me? What are you hiding?" Tony turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since they had entered the cabin. There was guilt in his eyes, but also something else, fear. It was unmistakable. "I didn't want this for you," he said quietly. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Miriam. I never wanted you to be involved." Miriam's mind was reeling. Involved in what? The questions were swirling in her head like a storm, and she couldn't keep up with them. "Tony, stop," she said, her voice sharper now. "I'm already involved. What is it that I'm caught up in? What's the truth?" He hesitated, looking as though he might say something, but then he seemed to change his mind. Instead, he stepped further into the cabin, walking toward the small wooden table in the corner. It looked like it had been untouched for years, a relic of a time long past. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, tattered envelope. He held it out to her without saying a word. Miriam stared at it for a moment, not sure if she was ready to open whatever Pandora's box lay inside. But she took it. With trembling fingers. She opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. The writing on the page was messy, hurried, and incomplete, but Miriam's eyes caught a few key phrases, enough to make her stomach tighten. "She has the key. They will do whatever it takes. Find her before she realizes what she's holding." Miriam's breath caught in her throat. "What does this mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tony was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "It's about you, Miriam. It's always been about you. You're part of something much bigger than you realize. And I've been trying to protect you from it." She looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a dark cloud. "What are you talking about? What's bigger than me? What's going on?" Tony rubbed a hand over his face, his exhaustion evident. "I'm part of a group, an organization, built to track down people like you. People who hold secrets. Secrets that could change everything." He paused and looked at her. "You have one of those secrets, Miriam. You have something they want, something they'll stop at nothing to get." Miriam's mind was spinning. "What kind of secret?" she asked, her voice rising with panic. "I don't have any secrets." "What are you talking about?" Tony looked at her, his expression softening for the first time in what felt like forever. "Miriam, you're not just a regular person. There's something inside of you, something that they want. And I had to keep you in the dark, to keep you safe. But now it's too late." Miriam shook her head, unable to comprehend the full scope of what Tony was saying. "I'm just a regular person," she repeated, her voice trembling. "There's nothing special about me. I'm nobody." Tony stepped closer, his face filled with urgency. "That's the thing, Miriam. You're not nobody. You're the key. They've been looking for you for years. The truth is, you're not just human. You're a part of something bigger than you ever imagined." A cold chill ran down her spine. "What does that mean? What are you trying to say?" Tony swallowed hard. "Your family, your mother, your father, they were part of this too. They tried to keep you hidden, but they failed. You were always meant to find out the truth, but I wasn't supposed to be the one to tell you." Miriam's eyes widened. "My parents? What do they have to do with any of this?" Tony didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to a small cupboard in the corner of the room and pulled out a box. It was an old wooden box, the kind that looked like it had been passed down through generations. He opened it carefully, revealing a set of old photographs, documents, and a strange symbol that Miriam couldn't recognize. "Your parents were part of an organization that studies certain things. People with abilities, like you. They knew what you were capable of, and they tried to protect you. But there are Others who want to use you, Miriam. They think that you're the key to something powerful, something that could change everything. Miriam was silent, her mind still reeling from the shock of the revelation. Abilities? Powers? This was insane. She wasn't special. She wasn't anything. But as she looked at the photographs Tony had spread out on the table, she saw faces she recognized. Faces from her past, people she thought were long gone. Her parents were there, smiling in old photos from years ago. But there was something strange about them, something hidden beneath the surface. And the symbol? It was the same one that appeared on the mysterious envelope. Tony caught her eye, his gaze intense. You need to understand, Miriam. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want from you. And I don't know if I can protect you any longer. Miriam's heart raced, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. The people after her weren't just random criminals, they were part of something bigger. They had been looking for her for a reason. And now, she had to figure out what that reason was before it was too late. Suddenly, there was a knock on the cabin door. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. They were here. Tony motioned for Miriam to stay quiet. He moved toward the door, his expression tense. Miriam could hear the soft creak of the floorboards under his weight as he approached. Whoever was on the other side of that door, they weren't here for friendly conversation. They had come for her. Would Tony be able to protect her? Or was the truth even darker than she had imagined? The clock was ticking. Would she survive the storm that was closing in around her? The knock on the door echoed through the quiet cabin, sending a jolt of fear straight to Miriam's heart. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she stared at Tony, waiting for some kind of sign, some clue as to what to do next. He stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the doorknob. Miriam's breath was shallow, her chest tight as she tried to make sense of everything she had just learned. Tony's face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and uncertainty. For the first time since all this had started, Miriam saw the cracks in his tough exterior. He was just as scared as she was. The knock came again, louder this time. And then, the voice. Tony, we know she's in there. Open the door. Miriam's stomach churned. She recognized the voice, it was one of the men who had been after her. The same ones who had been tracking her for weeks. They knew where she was. They knew who she was. And now, they were coming for her. Tony took a deep breath, his hand still gripping the door handle. He glanced back at Miriam, his eyes filled with regret and something else, something darker. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I should have told you everything sooner. But now, it's too late. Before Miriam could ask what he meant, Tony turned and opened the door. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of danger. Two men stood on the threshold, their faces cold and expressionless. They weren't there for small talk. They were there for one thing, Miriam. You have to come with us, one of the men said, his voice low and commanding. It's over, Tony. We gave you a chance to hand her over peacefully. Now, we'll take her by force. Miriam's heart raced. The cold dread in her stomach twisted, her instinct screaming at her to run. But where could she go? The woods were vast, and she was trapped in this cabin with nowhere to hide. Tony, the one person she thought might protect her, seemed just as trapped as she was. He stepped back, allowing the men to enter. You don't understand, Tony said, his voice pleading. She doesn't know what she's capable of. She doesn't know what you want her for. The men didn't respond, their eyes cold and unwavering. They moved past Tony, their focus solely on Miriam. She could feel their eyes on her, like they were seeing straight through her. You're coming with us, whether you like it or not, the second man said, his tone harsh and uncompromising. Miriam's legs shook, but she held her ground. No, she said, her voice trembling with fear but also a new determination. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't get to take me. The men exchanged glances, amusement flickering across their faces. One of them stepped forward, his hand reaching out to grab her. But before he could touch her, a sudden surge of energy erupted from Miriam's body. It wasn't like anything she had ever experienced before. It was raw, instinctual, like some primal force within her had been awakened. The man who had reached for her was thrown back, crashing into the wall with a loud thud. The other man stepped back, eyes wide in shock. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. Miriam stared at her hands, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. What had just happened? Was this what Tony had meant? Was this the secret that had been hidden from her for so long? Tony stood frozen, his eyes wide as he watched the scene unfold. "Miriam, you don't know how powerful you are, do you?" Her mind was spinning. "What the hell is going on, Tony? What was that? What do they want with me?" Before Tony could answer, the first man slowly picked himself up from the floor. He wiped the blood from his lip, his expression turning dark. "So, that's how it's going to be," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We'll see how long you can keep this up." Miriam's heart pounded in her chest as the man advanced on her again. She backed away, feeling the weight of the situation settle over her like a suffocating blanket. There was no way out. The men weren't leaving. They weren't going to give up until they had her. But then, something unexpected happened. The second man, the one who had been silent until now, stepped in front of her, blocking her escape. His face softened for a moment, as if he was reconsidering everything. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We don't want to hurt you. But you need to understand, Miriam, you have something that's far more important than you realize. It's not just about power. It's about survival." Miriam stared at him, unsure whether to trust the words coming out of his mouth. She didn't know him, didn't know anything about the world he was talking about. But something in his voice, in the way he spoke, made her hesitate. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He sighed deeply, glancing at his partner, who was still recovering from the shock of her unexpected power. "You're not just a regular human," the man said. "You're part of something ancient. Your family, they were chosen, Miriam. They've kept you hidden for years because they knew what you could become. And now, the world is finally ready for you." Her mind reeled. "My family? What are you talking about? My parents are just regular people." The man shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. "Your parents weren't regular people, Miriam. They were part of a secret organization that has been watching over you for years. They knew what you were destined to become, and they tried to protect you. But it's too late now. You're the key to something much bigger than yourself. And he pointed at the other man, they won't stop until they get what they want." Miriam looked at Tony, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and fear. "Tony, is this true? What is he talking about? What am I? What do they want from me?" Tony took a step toward her, his voice trembling with guilt. "Miriam, I'm sorry. I should have told you everything. You're the heir to a legacy that's been hidden for centuries. You're the last of your bloodline, and they'll stop at nothing to control you. You have powers, abilities, that no one else has. And they want to use you to reshape the world." The truth hit Miriam like a ton of bricks. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, was a lie. She wasn't just some ordinary woman caught in the middle of a dangerous situation. She was the key to something far larger and more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The man who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "We don't have much time, Miriam. You need to make a choice. Join us, and we'll help you understand what's happening. Or you can fight, and we'll have to take you by force." The room was silent, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Miriam's thoughts raced. She had never felt more powerless and yet more powerful at the same time. The power she had felt earlier, it was real. And if she was going to survive, she had to understand it. She had to take control of her own fate. "I don't know who you are, or what you want, Miriam said finally, her voice steady but filled with defiance. But I'm not going to let you use me. Not now, not ever. The man sighed, disappointment flickering in his eyes. You'll regret this. But it's your choice. As he spoke, the door suddenly burst open, and a third figure stepped into the cabin. Miriam's heart skipped a beat. It was her mother. Miriam's mother stood in the doorway, her eyes full of secrets and something else, something that could change everything Miriam thought she knew about herself. The room was thick with tension. Was her mother on her side? Or had everything been a lie? The final truth was about to be revealed, and Miriam's world was about to change forever.